Sarah Martinez stepped off the military transport bus at Fort Braxton's Special Operations Training Center, her duffel bag slung over one shoulder and her head held high despite the butterflies dancing in her stomach. The North Carolina humidity hit her like a wall, but she'd experienced worse during her time in Afghanistan. At 28, she was older than most recruits entering the elite tactical response unit, but her experience as an Army medic had earned her this opportunity. The training facility stretched before her like a small city. Low concrete buildings housed classrooms and barracks, while obstacle courses and firing ranges dotted the landscape. She could hear the sharp crack of gunfire in the distance and the shouted commands of drill instructors putting recruits through their paces. "You lost, sweetheart?" The voice came from behind her, dripping with condescension. Sarah turned to see a tall man in his early 30s approaching, his instructor's uniform crisp despite the heat. His name tag read Collins, and his muscular frame suggested years of military training. Behind him stood another instructor, shorter but equally intimidating, with Peterson embroidered on his chest. "Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, reporting for TRU selection," she replied, her voice steady and professional. She'd learned long ago not to let intimidation tactics affect her composure. Collins looked her up and down, his expression skeptical. "Another one, Peterson. Command keeps sending us these diversity recruits thinking they can handle what we do here." He laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "How much do you weigh, Martinez?" "Maybe 120 soaking wet?" 135 pounds, sir," Sarah answered truthfully, though she knew where this conversation was heading. She'd faced similar attitudes throughout her military career, from basic training to her deployments overseas. Peterson shook his head, making notes on his clipboard. "Look, nothing personal. But the TRU isn't a social experiment. We need operators who can handle themselves in close-quarters combat, who can take down terrorists and rescue hostages. This isn't about being politically correct." Sarah felt the familiar fire building in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "I understand the requirements, sir. I'm here to meet them." "We'll see about that," Collins muttered. "Barracks are that way. Get settled in. Training starts at 0500 tomorrow. Try not to get yourself hurt on day one." As Sarah walked toward the barracks, she could hear the two instructors talking behind her. Their words carried on the humid air, meant to be overheard. "Give her a week," Peterson said. "Maybe 2 if she's stubborn." "I'm betting 3 days," Collins replied. "Soon as we get to hand-to-hand combat, she'll realize she's out of her league." The barracks were stark but clean, with 2-person rooms lining a central corridor. Sarah found her assigned room and discovered her roommate was already there, unpacking gear with military precision. The woman looked up as Sarah entered, offering a genuine smile that was a welcome change from the reception she'd received outside. "Kelly Chen," the woman said, extending her hand. She was Asian American, probably mid-20s, with the lean build of a runner. "Navy Explosive Ordnance Disposal." "You?" "Sarah Martinez, Army medic, Afghanistan deployment." Sarah shook Kelly's hand, noting the firm grip and calloused palms that spoke of hard training. "I heard Collins giving you the welcome speech outside," Kelly said with a grimace. "He gave me the same treatment yesterday. Apparently we're both diversity experiments, according to him." Sarah unpacked her gear methodically, hanging her uniforms and organizing her equipment. "How many women are in this selection?" "Just us 2 out of 43 candidates," Kelly replied. "The odds aren't exactly in our favor, but that's nothing new, right?" That evening, Sarah studied the training manual while other recruits played cards or wrote letters home. The Tactical Response Unit selection process was designed to push candidates beyond their limits, testing not just physical capabilities, but mental toughness and tactical thinking. The dropout rate was 70%, and that was before considering the additional challenges she'd face as one of only 2 women. The manual detailed everything from weapons proficiency to hand-to-hand combat, from hostage rescue scenarios to counter-terrorism operations. Each phase of training would eliminate more candidates until only the most capable remained. Sarah had seen similar programs during her military career, but none quite as intensive as this. "Lights out in 10 minutes," called the duty officer from the hallway. Kelly closed her own manual and looked over at Sarah. "You know they're going to try to break us, right? Collins and Peterson, they think we don't belong here." "Let them think what they want," Sarah replied, closing her manual. "I've been underestimated before." The next morning arrived with the harsh blast of a whistle at 0500 hours. Sarah was already awake, having learned during her deployment that being ready before the official wake-up call gave her a psychological edge. She dressed quickly in the prescribed physical training uniform and joined the formation outside the barracks. 43 candidates stood in neat rows, most of them young men with the confident bearing of soldiers who'd excelled in their previous units. Sarah noticed she and Kelly were positioned in the back row, whether by coincidence or design. Collins appeared before the formation, his voice carrying across the morning air. "Good morning, candidates. Welcome to hell. For the next 8 weeks, we will test every aspect of your capability to serve in the Tactical Response Unit. Most of you will fail. This is not a reflection of your worth as soldiers, but simply the reality that elite units require exceptional individuals." He began walking along the front row, his gaze moving from candidate to candidate. "We will push your bodies to their limits. We will test your mental toughness. We will put you in scenarios that would break ordinary soldiers. Some of you will quit today. Others will last longer before reality sets in." When his eyes met Sarah's, she saw the challenge there. He expected her to be among the first to quit. "First exercise," Collins announced. 5-mile run in full gear. Anyone who falls behind gets eliminated. Move out." The run began at a punishing pace across the varied terrain of the training facility. Sarah settled into a rhythm she'd perfected during her deployment, conserving energy while maintaining position in the middle of the pack. She'd always been a strong distance runner, a skill that had served her well during combat operations where endurance often mattered more than pure speed. By the 3rd mile, several candidates had already dropped out, unable to maintain the pace while carrying their full gear. Sarah's breathing was controlled, her form efficient. She noticed Kelly keeping pace beside her, both of them steadily moving up in the formation as larger, more muscular candidates began to struggle. "Looking good, Martinez," Kelly said quietly as they crested a hill. "These guys are burning out fast." By the 4th mile, Sarah had moved into the top third of remaining candidates. Her military experience showed as she navigated obstacles and rough terrain that challenged others. Behind her, she could hear the labored breathing of candidates who'd started too fast. As they entered the final mile, Sarah increased her pace slightly, passing several more candidates who were struggling. She finished 7th out of the 36 candidates who completed the run, with Kelly close behind in 10th place. Collins waited at the finish line, his expression unreadable as candidates continued to arrive. When the last qualifying runner stumbled across, he addressed the group. 7 candidates eliminated on day 1, he announced. For those remaining, this was your easiest test. It only gets harder from here. The rest of the morning consisted of weapons familiarization and marksmanship training. Sarah's experience with various firearms during her deployment showed immediately. She qualified expert on every weapon system, her shots consistently finding the center of targets at distances that challenged other candidates. "Not bad for a medic," Peterson commented as he checked her targets, though his tone suggested he'd rather not admit her competence. Lunch was brief and utilitarian, with candidates wolfing down military rations while instructors explained the afternoon's training schedule. Sarah noticed the other candidates sizing each other up, alliances and rivalries already beginning to form. The afternoon brought tactical movement exercises, where candidates had to navigate obstacle courses while carrying wounded mannequins. Sarah's medical training proved invaluable as she demonstrated proper techniques for moving casualties that other candidates struggled with. "Where'd you learn that?" asked Mike Rodriguez, a young ranger who'd been among the top performers during the morning run. He was watching Sarah efficiently maneuver a 200-pound mannequin through a simulated building clearing exercise. "Afghanistan," Sarah replied simply, adjusting her grip to maintain better control. "You carry a lot of wounded soldiers when you're the medic." Rodriguez nodded with newfound respect. "You deployed with infantry?" 11 months with the 10th Mountain Division," Sarah said, completing the exercise and checking her time. "Good enough to get me here." That evening, as candidates cleaned weapons and prepared gear for the next day's training, Sarah reflected on her first day. She'd performed well in every exercise, proving she belonged among these elite candidates. But she could still feel the skeptical gazes of Collins and Peterson, their expectation that she'd eventually fail. Kelly joined her at the weapons cleaning station, both women working in comfortable silence as they maintained their rifles. Around them, other candidates shared stories from their units and speculated about upcoming training. "They're waiting for us to mess up," Kelly said quietly, running a cleaning rod through her rifle barrel. "They can keep waiting," Sarah replied, her voice carrying quiet determination. "I've been waiting for this opportunity my whole career. I'm not giving it up because some instructors have outdated ideas about who can do this job." The second day brought urban combat training, with candidates moving through mock building layouts while engaging targets and avoiding civilian mannequins. Sarah's medical training had taught her to move efficiently through cramped spaces, skills that translated well to close-quarters combat. She noticed Collins watching her more intently now, taking notes as she completed each exercise. His initial dismissiveness had been replaced by something harder to read, though still far from acceptance. The third day introduced team-based exercises, where candidates were divided into squads and given complex missions to complete. Sarah found herself working with Rodriguez, Kelly, and 2 other candidates on a simulated hostage rescue scenario. "Martinez, you take point," Rodriguez said as they planned their approach. "Your movement yesterday was solid." Sarah appreciated the confidence he showed in her abilities, a stark contrast to the instructor's attitudes. She led the team through the exercise flawlessly, her medical training helping her quickly identify which mannequins were hostages versus threats. "Time," called Peterson as they completed the scenario. He checked his stopwatch and made notes, his expression neutral. "Acceptable performance." That was the closest thing to praise Sarah had received from either instructor. By the end of the first week, the candidate pool had shrunk to 28. Sarah had consistently performed in the top tier of all exercises, earning grudging respect from her fellow candidates even as Collins and Peterson maintained their skeptical stance. The real test would come during the second week, when hand-to-hand combat training began. Sarah knew this was where the instructors expected her to fail, where her smaller size would supposedly prove she couldn't handle the physical demands of elite operations. She spent the weekend preparing mentally, reviewing techniques she'd learned during her military career and practicing movements that would maximize her advantages while minimizing her physical disadvantages. She'd never been the strongest soldier, but she'd always been among the smartest and most technically proficient. Monday morning arrived with the announcement that had been building all week. "Today we begin close-quarters combat training," Collins announced to the remaining candidates. "This is where we separate the operators from the pretenders. In real-world scenarios, you may find yourself disarmed, outnumbered, or fighting in confined spaces where your rifle won't help you." He gestured toward a large training mat surrounded by safety equipment. "Each of you will face multiple opponents, including scenarios against armed adversaries. The goal isn't just to win, but to demonstrate the tactical thinking and physical capability necessary for TRU operations. Sarah felt the familiar pre-combat focus settling over her mind. This was the moment Collins and Peterson had been waiting for, the test they expected her to fail. She could feel their anticipation as they prepared to watch her struggle against larger, stronger opponents. What they didn't know was that Sarah had been preparing for this moment her entire military career. Every challenge, every deployment, every time she'd been underestimated had led to this point. She was ready to show them exactly what she was capable of. The training mat awaited, and with it, the chance to prove that skill, technique, and determination could overcome assumptions about size and gender. Sarah stepped forward, her mind already calculating angles and leverages, planning the moves that would silence the doubters once and for all. The hand-to-hand combat training began with basic techniques, but Sarah could feel the instructor's eyes on her as she moved through the fundamental movements. Collins demonstrated proper stance and grip techniques, while Peterson circulated among the candidates, correcting form and offering guidance. "Martinez!" Peterson called out as Sarah practiced a basic armbar technique with Rodriguez. "Your positioning is off. This isn't a dance class." Sarah adjusted her stance, though she'd performed the technique correctly the first time. She'd learned similar moves during combatives training in the Army, refined through practical application during her deployment, when medical personnel sometimes found themselves in dangerous situations. "Better," Peterson said grudgingly, moving on to correct another candidate who was genuinely struggling with the technique. The morning progressed through increasingly complex scenarios. Candidates faced off against instructors wearing padded suits, attempting to neutralize threats while being evaluated on technique, speed, and tactical thinking. Sarah watched as several of her fellow candidates struggled against the larger, more experienced instructors. When her turn came, she faced Instructor Williams, a burly man who'd been brought in specifically for combat training. He outweighed her by at least 80 pounds and had the reach advantage that came with being nearly a foot taller. "Remember, Martinez," Collins called out loud enough for all candidates to hear, "this isn't about being fair. In real operations, terrorists won't go easy on you because you're smaller." Sarah nodded, settling into her fighting stance. She'd heard similar comments throughout her career, but experience had taught her that size wasn't everything in close combat. Technique, speed, and timing could overcome brute strength if applied correctly. Williams came at her with a controlled but aggressive attack, testing her defensive capabilities. Sarah moved fluidly, redirecting his momentum rather than trying to meet his strength head-on. She used his forward motion against him, stepping aside at the last moment and applying a joint lock that brought the larger man to his knees. "Lucky break," she heard Peterson mutter, but several other candidates looked impressed. The afternoon brought weapon retention training, where candidates learned to maintain control of their firearms in close combat situations. This was where Sarah's medical training proved unexpectedly valuable. Her experience treating wounded soldiers had taught her to work efficiently in high-stress situations while maintaining fine motor control. "The key to weapon retention," Collins explained to the group, "is maintaining your grip while using your body position to prevent an attacker from gaining control. Most soldiers panic when someone grabs their weapon and try to muscle their way out of the situation." He demonstrated the proper technique with Peterson, showing how body positioning and leverage could keep a weapon secure even against a larger opponent. Sarah watched carefully, noting the subtle details that made the technique effective. During the practical exercise, Sarah found herself paired with Jackson, a former Marine who was among the strongest candidates in the selection process. He was tasked with trying to take her rifle while she maintained control and neutralized the threat. Jackson grabbed for her weapon with surprising speed, but Sarah had anticipated the move. Instead of trying to pull the rifle away from him, she stepped into his attack, using the weapon as a lever to unbalance him while driving her elbow into his solar plexus. The combination of movements left him winded and without control of the weapon. "Time," called Williams, checking his stopwatch. 37 seconds from initial contact to threat neutralized. Solid work, Martinez. Sarah noticed Collins making notes on his clipboard, his expression thoughtful rather than dismissive for the first time since her arrival. The second week of training intensified significantly. Candidates faced multiple attackers, weapons retention scenarios, and complex tactical problems that required both physical and mental capabilities. Sarah consistently performed well, but she could sense growing frustration from Collins and Peterson as she exceeded their expectations. During a particularly challenging exercise involving 3 attackers, Sarah demonstrated the fighting style she'd developed during her deployment. She'd learned to use her smaller size as an advantage, moving quickly between opponents and using their own momentum against them. While larger candidates tried to overpower multiple attackers, Sarah focused on creating separation and picking her battles. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Rodriguez asked after watching her complete the exercise. "That wasn't standard Army combatives." "You pick things up during deployment," Sarah replied, not wanting to elaborate on the specific circumstances that had taught her those skills. Some experiences from Afghanistan were better left unshared. By Thursday of the second week, only 20 candidates remained. The attrition rate had accelerated as the training became more demanding, and Sarah noticed that Collins and Peterson were paying even closer attention to her performance. "Martinez," Collins said after that day's training concluded. "A word." Sarah followed the instructor to a quiet area away from the other candidates. Peterson joined them, both men wearing expressions she couldn't quite read. "Your performance has been adequate," Collins began, though his tone suggested the admission came grudgingly. "But next week's training is going to test you in ways you haven't experienced yet." "I'm prepared for whatever training you have planned, sir," Sarah replied. Peterson stepped forward. "Are you? Because next week we're doing advanced tactical scenarios, real-world simulations with live ammunition, explosives, and situations where hesitation gets people killed. This isn't about technique anymore. It's about whether you can perform under the kind of pressure that breaks most soldiers." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I spent 11 months treating wounded soldiers under enemy fire, sir. I know what real pressure feels like." Collins made a note on his clipboard. "We'll see. Dismissed." As Sarah walked away, she caught part of their conversation behind her. "She's better than I expected," Peterson admitted quietly. "Doesn't matter," Collins replied. "Next week will show us what she's really made of. Technical skills only go so far when the bullets start flying." That weekend, Sarah spent time reviewing the training manual and mentally preparing for whatever challenges awaited her. Kelly had been eliminated during Friday's training after struggling with a complex urban warfare scenario, leaving Sarah as the only woman among the remaining candidates. The loss of her roommate hit harder than Sarah had expected. Kelly had been a source of support and understanding in an environment where both were often in short supply. Now Sarah faced the remaining weeks of training completely alone among 19 men, most of whom respected her abilities but couldn't fully understand the additional pressures she faced. Sunday evening brought a briefing about the next week's training. Major Harrison, the overall commander of the selection process, addressed the remaining candidates in a formal classroom setting. "Congratulations on making it this far," he began. 20 candidates out of the original 43 represents exceptional performance. But this is where the real test begins. He clicked a remote, and the projector showed aerial photos of a complex training facility. "Next week, you'll participate in live fire exercises designed to simulate real-world TRU operations. These scenarios will test everything you've learned while adding the stress of actual danger." Sarah studied the facility layout, noting the various buildings, obstacles, and potential challenge points. It looked like a small city designed specifically for urban warfare training. "You'll work in small teams," Major Harrison continued, with scenarios including hostage rescue, counterterrorism operations, and high-value target capture. Instructors will evaluate not just your individual performance, but your ability to function as part of an elite unit. He looked directly at each remaining candidate. Some of you will not complete this training. The scenarios are designed to identify weaknesses that could prove fatal in real operations. Those who succeed will earn their place in the tactical response unit. Those who don't will return to their previous units with the knowledge that they gave their best effort. After the briefing, the candidates were given time to prepare their equipment and study the mission parameters they'd been provided. Sarah meticulously checked every piece of her gear, knowing that equipment failure during live fire training could have serious consequences. Rodriguez approached her as she worked. "You nervous about next week?" "Focused," Sarah replied, adjusting the straps on her tactical vest. "This is what I've been training for my whole career." "You know Collins and Peterson are going to be watching you extra carefully," Rodriguez said. "They still don't think you belong here." Sarah looked up from her equipment check. "They can watch all they want. I'm going to do my job." Monday morning arrived with an intensity that had been building since the first day of selection. The remaining candidates were transported to the advanced training facility, a complex of buildings and obstacles that looked like a war zone brought to American soil. Collins and Peterson were joined by additional instructors, all of them carrying live ammunition and wearing the serious expressions of professionals about to oversee genuinely dangerous training. Major Harrison addressed the group one final time before the exercises began. "Today's first scenario is weapon retention under extreme stress," he announced. "You'll face armed opponents trying to disarm you while navigating a complex environment. The key is maintaining control of your weapon while neutralizing multiple threats." Sarah felt the familiar pre-combat focus settling over her mind. This was different from the controlled exercises of the previous weeks. The scenarios would test not just her technical skills, but her ability to perform under the kind of life-threatening pressure that real operations demanded. "Martinez!" Collins called out. "You're up first!" Sarah stepped forward, knowing this was intentional. Collins wanted to test her immediately to see if the pressure of leading off would affect her performance. She checked her weapon one final time and moved toward the starting position. "Your scenario," Collins explained, "involves 3 armed opponents attempting to take your weapon. The environment includes civilians you must avoid harming and objectives you must accomplish while maintaining weapon control." Sarah nodded, waiting for the signal to begin. She could feel the other candidates watching, along with all the instructors who'd been skeptical of her abilities since day one. "Begin," Collins called. Sarah moved into the scenario with controlled aggression, immediately identifying threats and potential cover positions. The first opponent came at her from the left, grabbing for her rifle while trying to use his body weight to overwhelm her. Instead of fighting his strength, Sarah stepped into his attack, using his momentum to throw him off balance while maintaining control of her weapon. The second and third opponents attacked simultaneously from different angles, trying to overwhelm her with coordinated pressure. Sarah had faced similar situations during her deployment, when insurgents had attempted to overrun medical positions. She used her smaller size to move between the attackers, preventing them from using their numerical advantage while picking them off one at a time. The entire scenario lasted less than 2 minutes, but Sarah's performance was flawless. She maintained weapon control throughout, neutralized all 3 threats, and accomplished her objectives without endangering any of the civilian mannequins positioned throughout the course. "Time?" Williams called out. 1 minute, 43 seconds. All objectives met. No civilian casualties. Weapon retention maintained throughout. Sarah stepped back from the course, her breathing controlled despite the intensity of the exercise. She could see surprise on several instructors' faces, including Collins and Peterson, who'd expected the pressure to overwhelm her. "Adequate performance," Collins said. though his tone suggested the admission came reluctantly. As the other candidates took their turns, Sarah reflected on how far she'd come since that first day when Collins had dismissed her as a diversity recruit. Her performance spoke louder than any words could, proving that skill and determination mattered more than assumptions about gender or size. The week continued with increasingly complex scenarios, each one designed to test different aspects of tactical capability. Sarah excelled in hostage rescue situations, where her medical training helped her quickly assess and treat wounded civilians while maintaining tactical awareness. During a counter-terrorism exercise, she demonstrated innovative thinking by using unconventional routes through the facility to outflank opponents who expected more direct approaches. Her smaller size allowed her to move through spaces that larger candidates couldn't navigate, giving her tactical advantages they couldn't replicate. By Wednesday, only 15 candidates remained. The live-fire training had eliminated several participants who couldn't handle the pressure or who made tactical errors that would have proven fatal in real operations. Sarah had consistently ranked among the top performers, earning grudging respect even from instructors who'd initially doubted her capabilities. But she could sense that Collins and Peterson were planning something special for her, a final test designed to either prove their point or definitively disprove it. Thursday brought individual evaluation sessions, where each remaining candidate would face customized scenarios designed to test their specific weaknesses. Sarah knew her session would be particularly challenging, crafted specifically to exploit any limitations in her combat capabilities. "Martinez," Major Harrison called her name as the individual evaluations began. "Your scenario will test advanced weapon retention against multiple armed instructors in close quarters." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. This wasn't going to be against candidates or civilian role players. She was going to face actual instructors, men who'd been training for years, specifically in close quarters combat. Collins stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Your scenario involves losing your primary weapon and facing two armed instructors attempting to capture you alive. You'll have access to training weapons, but your opponents will be fully equipped and highly motivated." Sarah nodded, understanding that this was the make-or-break moment Collins and Peterson had been building toward. This scenario was designed to prove their point that she couldn't handle the physical demands of real TRU operations. "The environment is confined spaces only," Peterson added. "No room to maneuver, no escape routes. Just you, two armed opponents, and whatever tactical skills you can bring to bear." As Sarah prepared for the scenario, she realized this was more than just training. This was Collins and Peterson's final attempt to prove she didn't belong in the tactical response unit. They'd designed a situation specifically to overwhelm her, to show that size and strength ultimately mattered more than technique and training. But as she checked her equipment and mentally prepared for the challenge, Sarah felt only determination. She'd faced skeptics before and had always found a way to exceed their expectations. This would be no different. The scenario was about to begin, and with it, the most important 8 seconds of her military career. Sarah entered the confined training space, a mock room designed to simulate a small apartment or office where TRU operators might find themselves trapped during real operations. The space was roughly 12 feet by 15 feet, with minimal furniture and no windows. 2 doorways provided the only exits, but she knew they would be blocked by her opponents. Collins and Peterson stood at opposite ends of the room, both armed with training weapons designed to deliver simulating paint rounds that would mark successful hits. They wore protective gear, but their weapons were real enough to demand respect and proper tactical response. "Scenario begins in 10 seconds, Major Harrison's voice announced through the intercom system. "Remember, Martinez, your opponents are attempting to capture you alive, but they will use whatever force necessary to accomplish their mission." Sarah took a deep breath, centering herself in the way she'd learned during those long months in Afghanistan, when staying calm under pressure meant the difference between life and death. She'd faced insurgents, improvised explosive devices, and hostile fire while treating wounded soldiers. Two instructors with training weapons, no matter how skilled, were a challenge she could handle. "Begin scenario," Harrison announced. Collins moved first, stepping forward with his weapon raised and attempting to corner Sarah against the far wall. His approach was textbook military doctrine, using his size and reach advantage to limit her movement options. Peterson moved to block the exit, creating a pincer movement designed to overwhelm her through coordinated pressure. For the first 2 seconds, Sarah appeared to retreat, allowing Collins to advance while she assessed both opponents' positions and equipment. Her medical training had taught her to observe details under pressure, and she quickly noted that both instructors carried their weapons in similar configurations, with identical tactical grips and attachment points. In the 3rd second, Sarah made her move. Instead of continuing her apparent retreat, she suddenly pivoted toward Collins, closing the distance between them faster than his combat experience had led him to expect. Her smaller size became an advantage as she slipped inside his weapon's effective range, where his training rifle became a liability rather than an asset. Sarah's left hand shot out, grabbing Collins' weapon at the barrel while simultaneously stepping to his right side. The movement was so fluid and unexpected that Collins' grip strength, impressive though it was, couldn't compensate for the leverage disadvantage she'd created. Her medical training had taught her precise anatomy and joint mechanics, knowledge she now applied to combat with devastating effectiveness. As Collins struggled to maintain control of his weapon, Sarah's right hand found the tactical grip, applying pressure to his fingers in a way that forced them to release their hold. The entire disarming sequence took less than 2 seconds, leaving Collins staring in shock as his weapon was suddenly in Sarah's hands instead of his own. But Peterson was already moving, his own weapon trained on Sarah as he attempted to take advantage of what should have been her vulnerable moment during the disarming process. He'd expected her to be focused entirely on Collins, leaving herself exposed to attack from the second angle. Instead, Sarah had been tracking his movement throughout her engagement with Collins. As she completed the first disarming, she was already in motion toward Peterson, using the confined space to her advantage rather than allowing it to limit her options. Peterson fired 2 paint rounds as Sarah approached, but her unpredictable movement pattern made her a difficult target in the confined space. She ducked low, then suddenly rose up inside his weapon's arc, her hands finding his rifle with the same precision she'd demonstrated against Collins. Peterson was a larger man than Collins, with more experience in close-quarters combat, but Sarah's technique didn't depend on overpowering her opponents. Instead, she used their own strength and momentum against them, redirecting their force while applying precise pressure to weak points in their grip and stance. Her left hand grabbed Peterson's barrel while her right found his grip, but this time she added a twisting motion that used his body weight against him. As Peterson tried to pull back, Sarah stepped into his movement, throwing him off balance while simultaneously applying a joint lock that forced him to release the weapon. The second disarming took only 3 seconds, leaving both instructors weaponless and staring at Sarah in stunned silence. "Time," Major Harrison called through the intercom. 8 seconds total. Both opponents disarmed. Trainee maintains control of situation. Sarah stood in the center of the room, holding one weapon while the other lay at her feet. Both Collins and Peterson looked at her with expressions she'd never seen before, surprise replacing the skepticism that had defined their interactions since her arrival. "How?" Collins asked, his voice carrying genuine confusion. "I've never seen anyone move that fast or with that precision." Sarah lowered the training weapon, her breathing steady despite the intensity of the encounter. Medical training teaches you anatomy and leverage points. Combat experience teaches you timing and situational awareness. Put them together with proper technique, and size becomes less important than skill. Peterson was examining his hands where Sarah had applied pressure to force him to release his weapon. You didn't just overpower us. You made it impossible for us to maintain our grip using some kind of joint manipulation. Pressure points and leverage, Sarah explained. When someone's holding a weapon, they're focused on the target in front of them. They're not thinking about protecting their grip against someone who understands exactly how their fingers and wrists work under stress. Major Harrison entered the room, followed by several other instructors who'd been observing the scenario through monitoring equipment. His expression was thoughtful as he looked between Sarah and the two disarmed instructors. In 20 years of running these scenarios, Harrison said, I've never seen two armed instructors disarmed that quickly by a single candidate. Collins, Peterson, your analysis? Collins looked uncomfortable, a stark contrast to his confident demeanor during the previous weeks. Her technique was flawless. She used our size against us, turned our advantages into disadvantages. Peterson nodded reluctantly. She demonstrated tactical thinking under pressure that exceeded anything we expected. Her approach was innovative, effective, and executed with precision. Harrison made notes on his clipboard. 8 seconds to neutralize two armed opponents in a confined space represents performance well above TRU standards. Martinez, how did you develop these capabilities? Sarah chose her words carefully. My deployment in Afghanistan put me in situations where medical personnel sometimes had to defend themselves and their patients. You learn to be creative when you're outnumbered and outgunned. Specific training? Harrison prompted. Some formal combatives training, but mostly practical experience adapted to my physical capabilities, Sarah replied. I learned early that trying to match strength with strength wasn't going to work for me, so I focused on technique and timing instead. The remaining candidates had gathered outside the training room, having heard about Sarah's performance through the facility's communication system. Rodriguez was the first to speak as Sarah emerged. 8 seconds? He asked, his voice carrying a mixture of admiration and disbelief. You disarmed both Collins and Peterson in 8 seconds? Sarah nodded, still processing what had just happened. The scenario had been designed to prove she couldn't handle the physical demands of TRU operations. But instead, it had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded the instructor's own expectations. That was incredible, said Thompson, another candidate who'd consistently performed well throughout the selection process. I've been watching Collins and Peterson train people for years, and I've never seen anyone handle them like that. The afternoon brought individual debriefing sessions with the evaluation board. Sarah sat across from Major Harrison, Collins, Peterson, and 2 other senior instructors she hadn't worked with previously. The atmosphere was markedly different from any previous interaction she'd had with the training staff. Martinez, Harrison began, your performance today requires us to reassess our evaluation criteria. What you demonstrated goes beyond standard TRU capabilities. Collins leaned forward, his earlier skepticism replaced by professional curiosity. I need to ask directly, how did you know exactly where to apply pressure to force weapon releases? That kind of precision suggests specific training. Sarah had been expecting this question. Medical training teaches you nerve pathways, pressure points, and joint mechanics. When you understand how the human body works under stress, you can predict how someone will react to specific stimuli. But the application to combat situations? Peterson asked. Trial and error during deployment, Sarah replied honestly. When you're treating wounded soldiers while under fire, you sometimes have to physically restrain people who are panicking or disoriented. You learn quickly what works and what doesn't. Harrison exchanged glances with the other board members. Your tactical thinking during the scenario was exceptional. Most candidates, even successful ones, would have attempted to escape or find cover. You chose to engage both opponents directly in a confined space. The confined space worked in my favor, Sarah explained. Their weapons became liabilities in close quarters, and their size advantages were negated by the limited room to maneuver. Sometimes the best defense is an unexpected offense. The questioning continued for another 30 minutes, with the board exploring every aspect of her performance and background. Sarah could sense their struggle to reconcile their preconceptions with the reality of what she'd demonstrated. Finally, Harrison concluded the session. "Martinez, you'll receive your final evaluation with the other candidates. Dismissed." That evening, the remaining candidates gathered in the common area to discuss the day's events. Sarah found herself at the center of attention in a way she'd never experienced during her military career. "You've got to teach me some of those moves," Rodriguez said, only half joking. "I've been through Ranger training, Special Forces preparation, and I've never seen anything like what you did today." Thompson nodded in agreement. "Collins looked like someone had just performed magic in front of him. I don't think he knew what hit him." Sarah appreciated their admiration, but she also felt the weight of what had happened. Her performance had exceeded everyone's expectations, including her own. She'd proven beyond doubt that she belonged in the tactical response unit, but she'd also revealed capabilities that might lead to questions she wasn't prepared to answer. The next morning brought the final evaluation session. The remaining 13 candidates stood in formation as Major Harrison prepared to announce the results of the selection process. "Over the past 3 weeks," Harrison began, "you've been tested in every aspect of tactical operations: physical fitness, weapons proficiency, tactical thinking, and performance under pressure. Most importantly, you've been evaluated on your potential to operate as part of an elite unit where the margin for error is measured in milliseconds and lives." He looked along the line of candidates. 8 of you have demonstrated the capabilities necessary to join the Tactical Response Unit. Your names will be called, and you'll receive your assignment orders." Sarah felt her heart racing as Harrison began reading names. Rodriguez was first, followed by Thompson and 5 other candidates who'd consistently performed well throughout the selection. "Martinez!" Harrison called her name, 8th and final on the list. Relief flooded through Sarah as she stepped forward with the other selected candidates. She'd done it. Despite the skepticism, despite the additional challenges, despite being one of only 2 women to start the process, she'd earned her place among the elite. Collins approached her as the formation was dismissed. His expression was serious but no longer skeptical. "Martinez, I owe you an apology," he said quietly. "My initial assessment was based on assumptions rather than capability. What you demonstrated yesterday changes how I'll evaluate future candidates." Peterson joined them, equally serious. "Your performance was exceptional by any standard. I've trained hundreds of candidates over the years, and I've never seen someone adapt tactical principles the way you did in that scenario." Sarah accepted their words graciously, understanding that this was as close to an admission of error as she was likely to receive. "Thank you, instructors. Your training pushed me to demonstrate capabilities I wasn't sure I possessed." Harrison approached with her assignment orders. "Martinez, you'll be joining TRU Team 3, specializing in hostage rescue and counterterrorism operations. Your medical background and demonstrated tactical capabilities make you an ideal fit for their mission profile." As Sarah read her orders, she reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From that first day when Collins had dismissed her as a diversity recruit to yesterday's 8-second demonstration of exceptional capability, she'd proven that determination and skill could overcome any preconception. The other selected candidates were celebrating their success, but Sarah felt a quiet satisfaction that went beyond simple achievement. She'd not only earned her place in an elite unit, but she'd changed the minds of instructors who'd been certain she would fail. Rodriguez approached her as she finished reading her assignment. "TRU Team 3, that's one of the most active units. They handle the toughest missions." "Good," Sarah replied. "That's exactly what I want." "You know this is just the beginning," he said. "The real test comes when we're facing actual threats instead of training scenarios." Sarah looked at her assignment orders one more time, then folded them and placed them in her pocket. "I've been preparing for this my whole career. Everything else has been practice." As she walked toward the transport that would take her to her new assignment, Sarah thought about the 8 seconds that had defined her future. Years of training, months of deployment experience, and weeks of grueling selection had all led to that moment when she'd proven definitively that she belonged among the military's elite. Collins and Peterson watched her leave, both men fundamentally changed by what they'd witnessed. In their years of training special operations candidates, they'd learned to identify exceptional performers quickly. But Sarah had taught them that exceptional could come in forms they'd never expected. The transport pulled away from Fort Braxton, carrying Sarah toward her new life as a member of the Tactical Response Unit. Behind her, the training facility continued its mission of identifying and developing elite operators. But the instructors would never again make assumptions about candidates based on size, gender, or preconceived notions of who could handle the demands of special operations. Sarah's 8-second demonstration had changed more than just her own future. It had proven that in the world of elite military operations, skill and determination mattered more than physical appearance or traditional expectations. The skeptics had been silenced, and a new standard of evaluation had been established. As the landscape rolled past the transport window, Sarah allowed herself a small smile. She'd faced down the doubters and emerged victorious, not through luck or lowered standards, but through exceptional performance that exceeded every measure of success. The real work was just beginning, but she was ready for whatever challenges awaited her as part of the military's most elite tactical response unit.